transformation. And this is where Dr. Jay Dunn comes in. Dr. Jay Dunn, I have to read because this is a beautiful bio, is the founder, CEO, and lead scientist for MyHappyGenes, a platform designed to give people insight into how their genetics affects their emotional well-being and how to turn on the genes that contribute to living a happier and healthier life. She is a chiropractic physician, is certified in functional medicine, and has been practicing natural medicine for over 30 years. She is an internationally known lecturer on genetics and nutrition, as well as a published author of 2 books. She teaches physicians around the world on how to use genetic information to discover the underlying causes of disease. Dr. Jay Dunn, officially welcome.
Thank you so much, Simeone. It's wonderful to be here. I'm very excited about this. And especially having it fall on Earth Day is awesome. So thank you.
The very first question for you is, you and I have been discussing how if you want to change the world, you have to start with yourself. And you and I have discussed about how that has been the main motivator for you to start up your company and to do genetics testing. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I think a lot of healthcare practitioners start with trying to fix themselves. I think that's the big impetus for a lot of people, and it was for me too. I'd been practicing, specifically for MyHappyGenes, I'd been practicing for over 30 years and doing natural medicine and having tremendous success. But I still had my own health issues. I still struggled with mood. I had lifelong depression and lifelong chronic fatigue syndrome, actually about 40 years of chronic fatigue syndrome. And I couldn't get it fixed with all the things that I knew and all the techniques I had in my bag. And then I started to look at genetics, the piece of the puzzle that we were not able to get to until very recently with the advent of the Genome Project, or the completion of the Genome Project. We could actually access genetic information and decipher it and look at it as a tool for understanding what's going on in our brains and bodies and minds and hearts. And I found some amazing answers with that. And my lifelong, after working with it for a little bit, my lifelong depression was gone very quickly. I mean, just gone. I experienced happiness for the first time in my life. And, I didn't even know what it was. I'd given lip service to it for most of my life, but to really feel it and go, oh, wow, that's what happiness is, was the most amazing transformation for me. And so, as, I stopped practicing and I began to teach doctors around the world, I thought, I want to reach more. I love your view of trying to get to 1 billion to 2 billion people with this message, because for me, it was above and beyond trying to, think positive and talk your way out of it and, listen to motivational speakers. That never really had any lasting impact. But once I got my brain chemistry balanced through understanding my genetics, it changed everything for me. It changed everything. And so I wanted to bring that to the world. And that's why I created this algorithm through, the software that we developed. We're getting as close to what I get in the clinic as possible with a unique software algorithm. So I'm very excited about helping people kind of have the same epiphany that I had, that, wow, it wasn't my fault. It really gave me a lot of genetic compassion to understand that there was an underlying biochemical imbalance that was there, that from my genetics. So we can talk a lot more about many of the concepts and what I just said, but that's the brief story.
I'm so excited to know all the things that are coming to mind, all the things you discussed. But tell us slightly more about your company, like how it's structured, when you started, and where you are located, and where you're at with the development of your products and services.
Yeah, I have an incredible software development team in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And actually I live in the Florida Keys now. I sort of ran away from home I practiced in New Mexico for over 32 years and realized I was exhausting myself. That's another whole story. But living in the Florida Keys, I decided to not practice anymore and really devote myself to the genetic piece of this. So I've been traveling all around the country, lecturing on this. And then I decided, Greg and I, my partner, were sitting on the front porch, and I said, what if we had a software program that could bring this to the world? Because there's so many people suffering from all kinds of brain chemistry issues, from depression, from ADD to anxiety to PTSD to addictions. And we were having incredible success with all those things, but it was all one-on-one. So it was just an idea, sitting there with our cup of coffee and brainstorming, and we're like, immediately we knew the name, MyHappyGenes, and it was just such a perfect fit. So now the software is done, the software piece of it, brilliant programmers that put this together. It was a really unique algorithm, because a lot of the companies out there are, here's one gene, here's one issue or one suggestion or one nutrient to take. And we know that it's not that simple, that it's actually a combination of genes that can have an effect on your brain chemistry and your underlying physiology. So to build that into the program was very tricky, but we found some amazing programmers and they put it in there. So it combines several different pieces into the final, what we call the 3D algorithm of genetic information, kind of stirs it up and then spits out recommendations on your diet and lifestyle and your recommended supplements to kind of balance out your brain chemistry. So to answer the question, where's our company now? We just went public with our first evaluation, our first report. So you can upload data that you've already gotten from 23andMe or Ancestry if you've done those. But we're right on the verge of getting our own DNA test kit, which I'm very excited about, because a lot of people are worried about privacy issues with 23andMe and Ancestry, which I get it, because they sell your data. They sold your data. If you got your genes tested, they sold your data to pharmaceutical companies. And that's kind of antithesis to where we want to go.
I'm going to touch on this later because I'm really curious about this. But how can you accomplish your real mission that you shared with me, that is taking care of the less fortunate, the homeless? You mentioned that was your next level of development.
Yeah, it kind of started there, really, because I was seeing, because I felt so much better and it changed my brain chemistry. I was looking around, and everywhere we traveled, we were stepping over homeless people. And especially in New York, this one guy was sitting on the street and he had a sign in front of him that said, please help me get money so I can die. I'm dying of cancer. Please help me get money to have a hotel room so I can die in a comfortable place. And I was just like, why is our society not taking care of these people? There's no real good answers there. They can feed them. They can feed them for a day, give them a place to sleep, but it doesn't solve the problem, because the majority of these people have addiction issues and have mental health issues. So that was, my first epiphany was, oh my gosh, we got to do something about this. This is a huge issue. And these people are ignored. We don't see them. We don't know what to do to help them. We can't. I think we all feel something when we pass a homeless person. Like, do we give them money? Does that help anything? And so my compassion for them was big, and I'm like, how can we help them? And so eventually we will have, as we begin to make a little money with our project, we will have a nonprofit organization that will help the homeless. So we're already talking about how can we implement that, and so we have some ideas on that. But our second area is PTSD for the vets, the vets that come home from war and they're lost, or they have PTSD and can't function. I've talked to a few of them down here, and they're like, yeah, my life is completely different than when I went away, and my relationships are suffering. And, it's like, wow, how can we help them? I think there's a lot we can do there. So
tell us a bit more about how your genetic makeup can actually affect your neurochemistry and therefore your mood and your personality, the way you present yourself to the world, more precisely.
Say that again, that last part.
The way you present yourself to the world.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And, the more I do this work, the more I'm just blown away by how much is not determined, but kind of, the patterns for your personality. And so as I'm a kinesiologist, that's a big part of what I do, which is muscle testing. And as I began to work with the genetics and understand them, I saw certain patterns. So for me, when I got my genes tested, it turned out I had homozygous genetic variants in the vitamin D receptor. And so no matter how much vitamin D I took, I couldn't absorb it well. A homozygous variant there will reduce your ability by about 70%. So when that happens, vitamin D is critical in how we make dopamine. It's critical in how we make serotonin. Lots of good studies on that. So you can imagine that it made a lot of sense to me that, oh my gosh, this is why I've been depressed. And no matter what I did, I couldn't seem to lift myself out of it. And then once I understood, here's my genetic variants, how do I work with that gene? And I got the right combination of nutrients to basically fire it up better. Bam, my serotonin and dopamine went through the roof. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is happy. And I love living in that state. I was dealt a certain deck of cards, as we all are. And so there's, your unique, I can't say it, your unique genetic variants that you've inherited will color your personality. And it's just been fascinating. So whether you are, tend to be an angry person, grouchy, irritable, whether you tend to be more anxious and hypervigilant and worried, that can be very much colored by your genetic makeup. Whether you tend to be depressed, different kinds of depression. One could be just sort of an apathetic, low mood. And the other one is very, very bad, like a major depressive disorder kind of thing, where it's very, it's almost suicidal. Also, you could have genetic variants that can make you very susceptible to addictions. Which is fascinating to me too. And we've been working with that and having incredible success with, once we fill the brain with dopamine and get the genetic variants sort of balanced, their cravings for addictive substances just go away. It's like magic. So
I wanted to fire this question to you later, but I'm too excited. And affect your spirituality, you said.
Yes.
I find it so amazing. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It was a fascinating study that I kind of ran across, and it was on the DRD4 gene, the dopamine receptor. And it's a particular receptor in the brain that, if you have a genetic variant there, you have lower numbers of receptors. And so it keeps you kind of looking for more answers. And that particular one is, Asia, my daughter and I were talking about it a minute ago, is the novelty seeking gene. It keeps us looking, constantly searching for deeper and deeper answers. And I did see a study where they associated that one with a higher incidence of achieving nirvana or enlightenment. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. The DRD4 also associated with sort of an irresponsibility, and you and I were talking about when you're in a blissful state, you're not thinking about, did I pay my bills?
Definitely not.
You're thinking about very lofty things. So it was a fascinating twist on, in the literature, the DRD4 gene is associated more with out of wedlock children, irresponsibility, not paying your bills, blah, 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 not keeping a job, not keeping a relationship. But if you twist it the other way, it is no, I'm looking, I'm looking for the next thing that, really elevates my consciousness. So it's kind of a fascinating genetic variant.
Also, and because we are a community, this is even more relevant. They affect our ability to create relationships, whether platonic or friendly or not. And therefore create the ability to create communities. We are discussing about the difference between Neanderthals and sapiens. I was wondering if they were missing, the first they were missing some genes that the second had been able to develop or to stimulate.
Right. Yeah. Well, that has to do with the oxytocin gene, and it's fascinating to me. That's one area that I just love to look into and examine, because it is how we created societies. It's how we trust each other. It's our bonding hormone. And when women give birth, incredible amount of oxytocin is created, and we love our children more than anything. That love is so deep and so strong if they have, the ability to make oxytocin and, again, receptors for it as well. That's all genetically determined. Some women give birth and they're like, no connection, no mothering instinct. And that's, that is what it is, but it's very much colored by oxytocin. So you can't, the cool thing is, I'm not saying, oh, this is written in stone and that's the way you are. There are lots of things you can do to modify your genetics and increase your oxytocin levels and your bonding levels. So it's very cool. So yeah, coming back to your question about Neanderthals and, Cro-Magnons, et cetera. It was when our brains started to secrete more oxytocin that we began to have societies where we could trust each other. We could trade skills, like, okay, I'm going to make this tool and I'm going to trade it for clothing from you. Yeah. So we can specialize. So that was all due to oxytocin and the creating of societies around that, specialization of techniques. So if you think about it, no other species does that. Like no other species cooperates the way humans cooperate. And that's why we've been allowed to, like I say, society. But I think it's a very fascinating topic. And here's a little tidbit about oxytocin. I had a patient come in and she was weeping and she's crying and she's, way too much oxytocin. She's caring about everything that's happening in the world and all of it affects her. She can't watch the news because she's crying all the time. And she's a doctor and her patients, she's taking the whole thing home with her and just overwhelming with the amount of compassion she had. So we might think, oh, the more oxytocin, the better. Well, not necessarily. It really kind of incapacitates your ability to function in the world. And I didn't know how to balance it. And I found it through the muscle testing. And it was like, oh yeah, our oxytocin's too high. And so I didn't know. I'd never seen this before. And I'm going to let you guess how I balanced it. I'm going to give you. So between men and women, who do you think has more oxytocin, just in general?
Between women and
men, between men and women, who do you think? We know, right?
Simple.
Simple. And it's for a reason, because men have to be a little more detached from connections so that they can protect, as a species, we needed you guys to be out there protecting us. And imagine you were in a war, you were a warrior, and you killed somebody and you're like, oh, bam, you're dead. So the antidote for her was testosterone. When I gave her a little bit of testosterone, it gave her more boundaries, more like solid groundedness on the earth. So it's all about balance. Too much, too little of anything is off balance. So
which area of the brain or which areas of the brain are responsible for creating oxytocin?
It's the posterior pituitary. So it's ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and that's vasopressin and oxytocin are both created by the posterior pituitary. It's interesting because that's sort of the hindbrain. That's, that was like our primitive brain. So those are some very primitive. Vasopressin is also another hormone, again, genetically determined, that allows for bonding, and usually pair bonding or group bonding, like the trans tech people. There's a certain amount of vasopressin needed to kind of bring people together in a group or a tribe, or to cooperate together. So
how's the gene makeup influencing the way we eat?
Oh, good question.
What do we make as far as nourishment is concerned?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You're asking amazing questions. This is great. So a very, very big connection there for sure. One that comes to mind in particular is, carbohydrate cravings. A lot of people are like, oh, I can't stop. I don't have the willpower to stop eating carbohydrates. And there are definite genetic variants that will predispose you to craving carbohydrates as a fuel source, that once you upregulate those genes, you don't crave it anymore. And it's an interesting area because, being overweight is sort of a big area of prejudice in our world. We look at people and we go, just put the ice cream down and go for a walk. We don't have a lot of compassion for that. But the more I did this, the more I realized, oh my gosh, their biochemistry is so unbalanced that they really have to have, their brain is screaming for those carbohydrates and sugars. And once you get the body balanced, they don't. You lose your cravings for that. other areas, you know, are you in our report, in our diet and lifestyle report, we give you sort of your best diet. You know, what are you best at breaking down proteins as a fuel, or fats, or carbohydrates, and what ratios are going to be your best for your genetics.
Wonderful.
So, you know, you and I have talked about how do we build a technology into having people stay on, you know, as close to their genetic diet as possible, which would be an amazing, you know, next step for us. But you can, with looking at the report now, you can get a sense of, oh, wow, I've been eating wrong. I thought the keto diet was the thing for me, when it may not be. You may not have the genetics, like you may not make enough bile, or you may not have the right physiology for breaking down all those fats that are in a keto diet. There's so many variations on diets, and everybody thinks, you know, they have the right one. It turns out they're all right for somebody, but not for everybody. So getting the right diet for you is very much genetically predetermined.
Same thing, your proclivity to be on an intermittent fasting, right? Isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, everybody thinks that's a great thing because it increases autophagy, or basically our body's ability to break down old dead blood cells and body cells. But not everybody is designed, their bodies aren't designed with, you know, to thrive under intermittent fasting. They need like little more consistent calories, you know, over time to be at their optimal. And that was really interesting because I found the genes, you know, that were associated with doing well on intermittent fasting and not. So it was really interesting. It's very enlightening to see, oh my gosh, wow, not everybody should do that. There isn't any like one size fits all. Everybody should do this kind of diet. So that's.
Well, I'd like our audience to be able to be revealed some of your wisdom hidden in your documents in a second. But firstly, I want to ask you about the second important pillar or just as important for our community, technology. Tell us a bit more about your AI algorithm. Perhaps share some of your records with us, or whatever is at the basis of your algorithm.
Okay, I would love to do that. Let me pull up I'm going to share my screen here. Oops, you went away. I'm going to do a screen sharing here with you and show you a little PowerPoint so you can kind of get an idea of what's happening here. So there's MyHappyGenes. I'm going to take you to the algorithm. We decided that, you know, again, a lot of the genetic companies that we were looking at were just doing this first one, genes associated with brain chemistry or a disease process. You know, it was like one gene, one suggestion. And I realized, you know, through understanding this process very intimately, through working on patients for so long, that was not true. You know, you can't decide on any kind of therapeutic treatment with one gene. It's not going to happen. So they are important. So what we did was we tallied up all the genes associated with brain chemistry issues. Those are inherited risks, your risk of depression or anxiety or ADD or PTSD or addictions. And we tallied them up. And then we combined them with a biochemistry, an understanding of the biochemistry imbalances. I gave you a little bit of hint about that with the vitamin D receptor, how it upregulates another set of genes to make dopamine and serotonin. So those are important, that those effects of, you know, this gene on that gene. And then the other thing is epigenetics. You know, we can't ignore the diet, lifestyle, social, emotional kind of aspects of how, you know, those items all affect your genes. They're how your genes express. So nothing is written in stone. Your genes are your genes. They're going to stay static, but how they express is very much labile. You know, you can change them through diet, lifestyle, social, and emotional. You can turn a gene on, turn it off. And so we wanted to do a questionnaire, and you know, tell me what you're experiencing right now, and then we associate that back with what genes did you inherit and what genes are in the biochemistry of your body that are having an effect on each other. So it was like 3 tiers, which was an unusual algorithm to look at with this genetic report. And like I say, we found an incredible team that was able to, you know, kind of mix these up and calculate them and bam, spit out your results that are a combination of these things. So it's much more accurate and much more robust.
That's the
In the end.
perfect segue for my next question. We are undergoing a big epigenetic bombardment with COVID-19, and that is certainly affecting the way our immune system is responding to it. What can our genes tell us about our immune system?
That's a really good question too. There's a lot there. I did a bunch of research on, what genes are going to make you more susceptible to an infection and a bad prognosis with an infection. Some people, they're saying that they got the infection, it was very mild and they had virtually no symptoms at all. And they've been tested, and sure enough, they're having antibodies, and they're like, wow, I didn't really feel much. And other people that are just devastated by it. So I looked into what genes would make you more susceptible to the infection, number one, and what genes would make you have a worse outcome, a more dramatic kind of effects from it. So I created a report, and I'm going to give it to you guys that are listening, the attendees of this. I'm going to send you, as part of the bonus, I'm going to send you the report. It's called COVID-19, the answer is in your genes. So it can give you some, not only like your risk, but also some areas where you can work with it. So one of them is that vitamin D receptor that I talked about, the VDR. It's very much involved in how your immune system matures T cells to fight infections. So if you've got a genetic variant there, taking things like vitamin A, D, and K together, K2 together, will upregulate your T cell production and allow you to fight off infections. So those kinds of things. The nitric oxide gene, if you've inherited a gene in the nitric oxide synthase area and you don't make nitric oxide easily, that's another area where it can cause you to not to not be able to mount a good response to a viral infection. So that's the kind of information that's in that report. So we'll be sending that to you after the webinar today.
So remember, we were discussing, is it possible to break down our species into genetic types? And also imagine a correlation between those types and the Ayurvedic types.
Yeah, very much so. I know you and I had kind of been talking about that a little bit, and I have thought about that over the years, because my training was in my main teacher was an Ayurvedic practitioner and herbal master. So that was like my first introduction to natural health. And, he divided up the world, and, through thousands and thousands of years from Ayurvedic medicine, that's been around. That was like the first, and then came, Chinese medicine after that. But they divided up the world into like three main doshas, or three main body types, the Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And you can be a combination of those, you can be Vata, Pitta, or Pitta, Kapha, or, so it's never black and white. And that's the way it is with genes. You can look at, I think the big areas that I see the most correlation here are the COMT gene, where you don't break down your excitatory neurotransmitters like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine. You don't break them down well, which makes you very anxious and coming out of your skin. And that's more like the Vata type. They're usually very creative and ADD, can't really focus and pay attention, but they're usually very smart too. So that really does correspond with kind of the Kapha personality. And then the VDR that we talked about is very much Vata was that one. So the VDR are very much associated with Kapha. These people tend to be like slow moving, just deliberate on things, a little on the depressed side, heavier than maybe other body types. Very much a correlation there with that gene. And then the Pitta comes from the MAO gene, which is the warrior gene, that monoamine oxidase gene. And that one can cause you to be a little hot-tempered, a little irritable. It's the warrior, it was in our genome for a reason, because the warriors won the wars and passed those genes down. So that one is more the Pitta. So you can say, oh yeah, you got a little Pitta coffee here, and that could be the COMT VDR combination, the COMT VDR combination. So I think there's a real correlation there, and I would love to I wrote a paper on it, but I would love to do a little more study on that and kind of like correlate the two. That would be very interesting. Yeah.
Can we say that there is a genetic reason why fear propagates much faster than love?
Oh man, as we're designed to respond to fear. I mean, that's like how we stay away from danger. And it's an interesting question because, yeah, our genes aren't a mistake. They're not mutations. They're variations. So especially the COMT gene, the COMT, the catechol-O-methyltransferase. That's the one that breaks down, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine. This person is going to be highly susceptible to fear and worry, and they can't seem to stop. So, how does somebody like that achieve, calm, balanced, inner peace? How does that happen? It's much harder for them to achieve that. I have a little meme that says, hurry up, enlightenment. Come on, I'm going to hurry. That is the total COMT gene. It's like they can't meditate because they're thinking about, oh, I forgot to do my laundry. I got to go to the store. They're the fears, like, did I leave the stove on? But they also were the ones, if you think back in our ancestry, our ancestors, those are the ones that saw the danger coming. They were the scouts. They were the ones who can't sleep, and they heard the slightest sound and bam, they're awake, and they are going to alert the tribe to a danger. So we can see how they were selected for, but it doesn't make for very pleasant, pleasant circumstances in our world, essentially, because it does keep them in a fear state. But the cool thing is there are things you can do to modify that gene and help it work better to break down your stress hormones and calm the body down, and then the mind calms down. I think we've had it a little bit backwards, because I see people, I'll say, do you think you're an anxious, fearful person? And they're like, no, I'm good, but they spent years learning to meditate and talk to themselves and calm themselves down. They have to work at it, much like I had to work at trying to be happy. They have to work at being calm. And I look at their genes and I'm like, you're either not really aware or you've just learned to deal with it. You've learned to compensate for that. And we give them some nutrients that help their body break down those stress hormones. And they go, oh, that's what calm feels like. And then their minds can calm down. So it's like, sometimes it's our bodies, all these neurotransmitters, these excitatory neurotransmitters are in there. And then we go, it must be because, I don't know, something that happened to me when I was a kid. Makes me fearful. When you calm the physiology down, and it's like, oh, that wasn't a big deal. So it's fascinating that it's a paradigm shift, kind of thinking about it backwards. Yeah.
Actually, are there ideally, theoretically, is there a right or like a well-balanced mix of genes that an enlightened innovator should possess? Like us.
If you could go back, you could use the CRISPR machine to change your genes. Yeah, it's funny. My mother-in-law, I looked at her genes and I'm like, oh my gosh. I always think of her as sort of like, what's going on in her? She's so calm. She doesn't react to anything. She's just like, la, la, la. Everything is fine. Like, I just marvel at her. Like, how do you do that? And then I looked at her genes and I was like, oh my gosh, now I understand. She doesn't have any of those COMT variants. She has very little like red in there, homozygous variants. I don't know how that happened because that person is probably not really selected for as far as like how our species is going to survive. Somebody walking around going, isn't everything wonderful? Look at the trees. This is awesome. So we have to be like, our whole society would have to be in sort of the same state. Otherwise, bam, she's squashed like a little bug. If we could all get there, or like you say, to the 25%, if we can reach that, then having these genes is awesome. But the cool thing is we can make up for your genes by giving you certain nutrients and lifestyle factors and diet that makes you into that kind of person. So, it changes your physiology so that you're walking around going, yeah, life is pretty cool. There's can I go on? There's more I want to say.
I'm
There are
amazed.
these
I have so many new questions.
Oh, okay. So the dopamine receptors are the most fascinating because they kind of color what you crave in your life, or where it kind of motivates us to achieve or do or get things. You know, it keeps us eating, and it keeps us procreating and having sex and making babies and all that. So a certain amount of low dopamine is good for the world, good for our species to continue. Otherwise, we'd be like, nah, everything's fine, good, don't need anything. Don't need food. I guess I should go get some food, you know. So the DRD genes, so there's the dopamine receptors. These are different receptors in different parts of the brain, and they have different effects on our physiology. The DRD ones tend to make us crave alcohol and cigarettes and drugs. So these people, when I see a lot of genetic variant there, they're highly susceptible to methamphetamine addiction. So the minute they try methamphetamines, bam, their brain fires up in a way that it's never fired up. So they kind of walk around feeling unfulfilled and like I need something, I don't know what it is. And bam, they try alcohol or they try cigarettes or drugs, and they're suddenly very hooked very fast. We look at those people and we go, come on, just stop it. Where's your willpower? It's not that way at all.
Nowhere to be.
What's that?
There's nowhere to be found, whatever they...
Right. They don't want to be addicted to those things, but wow, it's just way too satisfying to their brains and way too addicting. And then the DRD2s tend to be alcohol as well. There are a lot of alcoholism in that category. This one, you're going to see gambling, a little more gambling there, sex addictions, etc. But the DRD3s are fascinating. These are our workaholics. They're more often going to be motivated by achieving, or getting things. They're entrepreneurial genes. There's a lot of information in the literature, a lot of studies showing that it's a high rate of entrepreneurialism in the DRD3 genes. I have a lot of them, and I can't stop. It's like, okay, a new company. I'm going to make a new company today. Let's do this. But when I got it balanced, when I got my brain chemistry balanced, I stopped having to work 24/7, and I realized that I could stop and appreciate what I had. It's like, oh my gosh, I have all this stuff that I've been getting and not appreciating. Once you get it, like, you got to have the next dopamine hit, the next one, and the next one. So it's once you balance that brain, it stopped me from working 24/7, because I was teaching. I was seeing patients Monday through Friday, teaching all weekend, writing books, creating lectures, traveling. It just, it was not conducive to my body continuing to be healthy. And then once I got my brain balanced, I gave up everything. I sold everything I owned. I had this big house and all the stuff, all the furniture, all the things that I thought would make me happy. And I sold them all, and I downsized to this real small house that is like so much more peaceful. And I appreciate, I go out and I go, oh my gosh, a tree. It's amazing. I hadn't noticed that tree before. So that's the beauty of this. The DRD4s, we kind of talked about a little bit. That is more, the novelty seeking. This is the person that's like, oh my gosh, the next thing, the next relationship, the next car, the next house. It's sort of, I don't know about Italy. I think in Europe, you guys are a little more balanced here. You take a couple hours for lunch, and you take a month off for holiday. Are you kidding me? In America, do you know how far behind we would get if we took a month off? It's like, oh my gosh. So we need more balance in those areas.
Talking about this, and borrowing from what I said earlier about our idea that success doesn't create happiness, but it is happiness creating success. Most of the idea of how to gain success is got to by our brains by mirroring behaviors in business communities, for instance. I behave like him, therefore I'm expecting I'm going to be successful. We are instead trying to first introduce a different equation, and secondly say that there are other things that are at least just as important or need to be redefined for you to understand their importance. are there any genes that are responsible for social mirroring and for everything concerning such behaviors?
I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't ever looked at it that way. And I imagine the dopamine receptors would be that, they see somebody else achieve something and it's like, oh, I want that. So it's all a matter of wanting and low dopamine. So I would imagine it would be in those same categories. But if we can get to that place where our brains are happy and satisfied, then we can ask those questions, those very great questions that you asked. Who am I? Who are we? Which is even a more important thing. Not who can I be as good as you? Can I be better than you? Can I compete with you? But how can we support each other? And that's an oxytocin question. That's a vasopressin question. So I think if we can lower our dopamine or increase our dopamine to lower the receptors kind of driving us toward more, and increase our oxytocin, then that question is going to be the best question in the world.
Jay, I feel that whoever is still participating would really want to get into your toolbox. Like, show us something that some of your reports or some of your toolbox for us to understand how our genetic makeup can be represented documentally, so to speak.
Okay, yeah, let me share a screen and I'll show you my PowerPoint on this. I'm going to take you up to this. The thing that really, this all started with a concept called genetic compassion. Because the more I worked with people, the more I realized they are the way they are because often their genes are making them that way or making them tend toward that way. Yeah. So understanding why you are the way you are is really kind of what we're about. Let me give you just a brief overview of how this works with the genes. So okay. I think we're all familiar with, chromosomes. We have 23 pairs, so we have 46 chromosomes. Yeah. And then I don't know if you guys remember back from biology, cell biology, the base codes, the CG, TA. Yeah. Just a quick side note. When I looked up the CGs, it said that those base pairs were from extraterrestrial origins.
Oh yeah.
Things that make you go, Oh. Like from the meteor, the Murchison
meteor. Another webinar for that.
Yes, totally, yeah. So so this is your code. This is your blueprint that you inherited from one set from mom, one set from dad. And so it tells your body how to make certain proteins or enzymes. But if you have a change, if you've inherited, instead of here, a C, you got a G there, like a GG, instead, it's going to change that code for making an enzyme, which can interfere with the function of that enzyme. So if you have one gene from mom, one gene from dad, and one of them is a variant and the other one is normal, that's what we call heterozygous. If you have both genes that are not the right code for that enzyme, it's a homozygous variant. And those are the ones we pay the most attention to because it can reduce the activity of that enzyme by about 70%. That's a big hit. So for instance, the vitamin D receptor that I talked about, I've got homozygous variants there. My ability to absorb vitamin D is reduced by 70%. So taking more vitamin D is not going to work. Mm-hmm. I can't absorb it. So I need cofactors. And so understanding what cofactors can make that vitamin D receptor work better or, make up for the fact that I inherited that, that's kind of important. So we've been using 23andMe and Ancestry. Ancestry, you can get 40,000 SNPs. It's pretty cheap. It's $59 to $99. And it's you just spit into a tube, get your results. And then you plug it into our site to get the report. But like I said, we're very close to having our own DNA test. We've got a private lab that we've consulted with, and they're making the MyHappyGenes box, and that'll be available probably within a month. And it's all going to be private. You don't have to share anything. It's all going to be with a barcode, and doesn't have to have your name on it or collect any personal information. So we're kind of happy about that. But this is the raw data that we've been using. So this first category right here is an RSID number. That's on chromosome number 1. There's its position on that chromosome, and this is what you inherited, the A and the A. Again, one from mom, one from dad. I got A from both my parents on that gene. I don't know what this gene does, though. I can't read this. So that's why we need a software program to look through and go, okay, that gene codes for this enzyme that does well in the body. So that's what this looks like. So there's that RSID number. And, you know, we assign a name to those genes. So this one is the MAO. That's the warrior gene that I told you about. The traits associated there would be aggression, anger, brain chemistry, irritability. This person is a grouchy grouch, good warrior, make a good police officer probably. The risk allele, the wrong allele is A, and I got AA. This is my report here. So you can see I've got a bunch of red in the MAO gene, which makes me a little grouchy. I fully accept that. I do have grouchy genes. But my great-great-great-grandfather was William the Conqueror. You can see where this came from. You know, he was not a sweetheart. He was not a nice person. So I come by it honestly. My serotonin, this is an enzyme that breaks down serotonin. So if you can't break down serotonin, it causes irritability and ADD, some inability to focus as well. And then when you take B6, it makes up for that enzyme so that it keeps me from being grouchy. It really just chills me out. So that's the kind of thing we're doing, is what gene, what tendency do you have here, and how do we make up for that? So we use sliders. These are, you know, we calculate all of those three pieces of information that I talked about, and we give you your relative risk. So I've got, 40% risk of addictions. It turns out I'm not really one of those addictive personalities. Things never seem to stick with me. But it can, kind of give you a heads up, and especially with opioids, we have a risk slider for opioids, and mine is like way up here in the red zone. And I know this. When I was in the hospital, I was given Demerol, and I was like, wow, I like this. Could I have some more of that? And then this voice of reason said, don't do it, because I felt myself going, wow, I like that a little bit too much. And I was able to say, stop, please don't give me that again. No matter how much I beg you, do not give it to me. I'm one of those at high risk for opioid addictions. And that's kind of good information to know. If you ever go in the hospital, you want to know, geez, don't give me those kind of things. So these are the DRDs that I was talking about, the dopamine receptors. There's the DRD2s and 3s and 4s. So you get a sense of, again, the red ones are the ones that we're looking at most often because they're the homozygous variants. They're the ones that have the most effect on your brain chemistry and your personality. So we look at those. Do you have questions on that? Or actually, let me show you these genes. So this is the vitamin D receptor. If you've inherited a gene there, it can lead to low mood, apathy, addictions, low immune system, etc. So you're going to be highly susceptible to a COVID infection or viral infections of all kinds. And for me, I had Epstein-Barr virus for 40 years before I figured out what was going on with that gene and was able to work with it. These are the cofactors, vitamin A, K, and D. So once we fire up that vitamin D receptor, it turns tryptophan into 5-HTP and then serotonin. So it upregulates, that conversion into serotonin. And serotonin is our happy neurotransmitters,
On this specific topic, can fear influence the way we deal with our...
Yeah, very much so. And it's going to be, according to, this is the one where, increased fear, you're increasing your epinephrine and norepinephrine and dopamine in the body with fear. And if you can't break it down because of this genetic variant, it's going to lead to anxiety, panic disorder, and PTSD, or high risk of PTSD. So something traumatic happens to you, and, to another person, it wasn't a big deal. To you, it's like you can't forget it. For the rest of your life, you're thinking about that traumatic event where, it's the other person is going, I don't even remember that. I don't remember that happening. So when, let's say there was a global pandemic, for instance, whatever your genetic variants are is how you're going to be reacting to that stress. So whether you become angry and irritable and start, protesting and, just creating all kinds of havoc, or if you're going to be anxious and just paranoid about what's happening, and that got to have the mask, got to wash the hands, got to, sterilize my entire house. That's going to be the calm person, and the let's say the MAO, the MAO is the irritable one. The VDR is like, they go into a depression. Like, oh my God, this is never going to end. The world is coming to an end. We tend to think of the worst possible scenario and, oh, isn't it terrible? Less anxious, but more like depressed from it. So
talking about MEOs and gut being our first, a second brain, what can we say about us in a informational pandemic, or a pandemic anyway, dripping cortisol, making the wrong choices with respect to our nutrition, and how is that affecting our perception of reality around it?
well, that's a really good question, because it is, we are affected by all of those things, the stress in our lives, whether we're eating in congruence with our genetics, or whether we're stress eating. All of those are going to amplify our underlying genetic variants. So if we can get you to like eat within your ideal genetic kind of pattern and take supplements to balance those ideal genetic patterns, I think it changes your response. So again, it's a different way of thinking, a different paradigm. Like, don't, stop worrying. It doesn't really work that well. Yeah. Have you noticed? Like, okay, stop worrying. Okay, that's another thing for me to worry about. That's what the comp would say. I'm not supposed to worry.
Is it a veggie-based diet?
A veggie-based diet?
Yes, helping us get through such times of hardship and difficulty.
No, and I'll show you why. Not necessarily. For some people, yes. But take a look at this. So tryptophan, what is that? Yeah. It's an amino acid, right? So you got to have amino acids in there. So if you're already low in amino acids, if you're on a vegetarian diet, making serotonin is a little difficult. And you talked about the biome. The serotonin is made largely in the gut. A small percentage of it is made in the brain. So tryptophan coming from proteins. You can eat a vegetarian diet and get, make sure that you get your proper amount of proteins, but some of these are a little less prevalent in a vegetarian diet. And then here's another issue, B12. We know that vegetarians, that's one of the things that we're most deficient in. Yeah. Not getting enough sun, the vitamin D can affect this conversion. So we look at all of those things. Are you eating enough? Are you getting enough amino acids? Are you getting the proper amount of B12? Are you getting sun? And is your gut flora optimized for making serotonin in the first place? So all of those can have an impact on these kinds of pathways.
So could we say that genetic testing is really the panacea, is really the one-stop shop for getting started in our process of transformation?
I really feel like it is. Again, I've been in the natural healthcare world for over 30 years, and I've done it all, all that I could get my hands on, because I was just one of those people who could never stop because of my DRD3. But, I wanted to learn emotional techniques, and, I wanted to learn all about herbs. I wanted to learn about biochemistry. I wanted to know it all. And there were still things I couldn't get to, including my own issues, so I don't want to say it's a panacea, but it is an incredible way to start and get your foundation for everything else that you're going to do in your life. If you want to achieve nirvana, if that's your goal, then having your biochemistry work with you is a lot easier than trying to fight your biochemistry through all of that.
Do you have anything that shows the correlation between your genetic makeup and your allergies?
Allergies.
Yeah, intolerance and such and other intolerances that we seem to be plagued with lately. And why are we so plagued lately with gluten intolerance, for instance?
That is a long question. You sure you want to ask that one?
Well, we have good 5 minutes before we open to Q&A.
Okay, yes. There are definite genes involved in gluten intolerance, and often they're more expressed now because of low methylation issues, and that's a whole nother biochemical pathway in the body. But also another really important area, which is the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is how we make basically ATP in the body, or a basic unit of energy, how we turn food into energy through the Krebs cycle, through the electron transport chain. And lots of things can damage it, and things that our ancestors never had to deal with, including, pesticides, a lot of the chemicals, radiation, electromagnetic fields like 5G, heavy metals can do it, medications, especially antibiotics, because this mitochondria is where we make energy out of our food, is very damaged by antibiotics, and sometimes permanently. So when we have low levels of ATP, it causes us to be more reactive. Like we just can't mount the energy to increase nutrient absorption, to increase detoxification, to, all the processes in the body, including methylation, are impacted by those things. So these are lifestyle factors, and you can't get away from any of that anymore. You can't get away from electromagnetic fields. You can't get away from Roundup, pesticides. Medications are even in our water, chlorine, fluoride, those all damage the electron transport chain. So we're seeing things now that we never saw in our past.
Should we test our children, and is it ever too late to be genetically tested? Can we be saved?
You can be saved. Should we test your children? Yeah. And here's the thing that's so exciting is that, especially with a woman who's pregnant and she's, making a baby in there, if you give her the right nutrients and get her methylation going, I don't mean to, get too technical on you, but basically what you're doing with methylation is you're turning off the expression of certain genes. So you change the trajectory of that child's life forever. That's epigenetics in action. If you think about like bees, all the bees are the same DNA, right? They're clones, except for one who's a queen bee. She's the same DNA, but she's fed royal jelly, and it makes her twice as big. She lays 20,000 eggs a day. She's a whole different creature because she was given, the preferential royal jelly that's reserved only for the queen. It makes her physiology very different for the rest of her life. So the same thing can happen in gestation, in pregnancy. You can feed that pregnant woman the right nutrients for their genetics, and bam, you create a super baby. So it's very exciting. It's very exciting. Yeah.
I'll open the floor 3 minutes earlier because I'm sure we have questions coming in. I'm going to scroll in multiple directions. Let's see. Okay, what you use to change brain chemistry balance, from Remy.
What do you use? You use natural remedies, diet, and lifestyle. So, you find out, first of all, you get your genes tested to find out which genes are really affecting your brain chemistry. Yeah. And then we give you a diet and lifestyle report as well. That piece isn't up yet, but it's very soon going to be up. So it'll give you specific diets that will modify your brain chemistry, and specific nutrients that can modify it as well.
Now the question is, from what the genes are analyzed: blood, hair, saliva?
May have difficulty getting enough spit up, so it's going to be good.
Well, so the question is from B's phone: are mental, emotional, and spiritual practices also included in those environmental recommendations to optimize your methylation?
Mental and emotional, yes. I haven't done the spiritual yet. I need to do that. That would be good. I think I need to add that in there. I'm making a note right now. Spiritual practices that would be good for specific genetic variants. I guess that's what they're asking for. That would be good.
From Alison, you've mentioned microbiome and gut flora a few times. How does the presence or absence of different bacterial strains factor into your analysis?
They don't really factor into it, but they do affect it. So what I have found, and trained in functional medicine, and in the past, I would look at, do they need probiotics? Do they need some support for leaky gut? Do they need to, heal the microbiome and make it a big deal? It's hard. It's tricky. There's a lot of knowledge to it. But when I started working at the genetic level, I didn't have to do that anymore. It's like the body did it itself. And one of the big areas, I hate to going back to the VDR, but that's one big area, because the VDR upregulates your immune system. It'll kill off the bad bacteria that can destroy your microbiome. So when you do that, your good bacteria can then flourish. And I found that people's microbiome was healing when we give the body what it needs. And I love that concept that the power that made the body can heal the body. We give it what it needs. It's missing certain critical nutrients to do its job. And that's what we're doing, is we're giving it those specific nutrients. And we're building a multiple vitamin around your genetics to optimize, and make up for the fact that you inherited these genes can lead to imbalances, like the microbiome imbalances. So when you give the body the right tools, bam, it does it itself. And it's been beautiful. I've seen leaky gut just go away when we give it what it needs to do it itself. So it's very cool.
Crystal, what are the current roadblocks preventing more awareness and increased funding for this type of research? And why aren't more health providers looking into this? Seems like a huge oversight.
I agree. I think it's a big oversight. And I think a lot of medical doctors, they get this puzzled look on their face when you start to bring it up, because they've never studied it. It just wasn't taught, and it wasn't in the medical schools when they went to school. It's all brand new material. They're already overwhelmed, with their practices. They got 5 minutes to see a patient, and they don't have a lot of time to study. But it is my goal. We have a practitioners portal that we're creating, that it is my goal to get these people able to do the genetic report, and then it will spit out the diet and lifestyle practices that's very easy for them to do, very easy for them and their staff to implement. So I think they'll be interested in that if they don't have to learn it, because it's a lot of information on biochemistry and genetics and nutrition, that it's a big learning curve for them. So I'm trying to make it easy for them. All right, just get your patient's data, DNA tested, and stick it through the program, and bam, it'll give them the supplements that they need. I think a lot of doctors believe in that. Of course, there are some that'll say, supplements don't do anything. You're wasting your money. But I'm hoping they're fewer and far between, because there's so much literature showing how effective supplementation can be on everything. So that's my goal. It's my dream to make it easy for the medical practitioners to understand it. So it's a matter of getting out to them, getting audiences with medical professionals of all kinds. Right now we're traveling around the country and teaching doctors, and we have about 2,700 that we've worked with so far. But they're naturopaths, they're chiropractors, they're acupuncturists. They're all kind of in the natural healthcare field, and they get it, and they're like, yeah, let's do this. But I would love to break through that barrier to the medical establishment, and oh my gosh, it's going to change the world. Yeah.
From Bee's phone. And all of this takes into account our ECS microbiome, chrome, and other fundamental systems of the body accounted for in all of your testing.
All of the ECS. What is ECS? I don't know what that stands for.
Okay. You mentioned from James, you used muscle testing. Where do you recommend learning to do it from effectively?
Actually, I developed and taught kinesiology around the country as well. And I wrote a book called Holistic Kinesiology with a W. So you can start there with that manual. And we have teachers in several places around the country right now too. One in Santa Fe, one potentially in New York, another one in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So there's some places that you can learn it. Eventually, I want to put it on live, because right now, like, everybody's gone live because we can't travel anywhere. So I'm uploading all my material, the holistic methylation course, which is based on muscle testing, the muscle testing course, and then hoping that we can reach more people that way.
That's wonderful. Can this be used to help people, from Rachel, people with OCD or other specific anxiety disorders?
Yes, very much so. That it's the combo that I see, the MAO with the COMT gene is where you're going to see the OCD. So these people, it can range, anywhere from just a sense of perfection, like having to straighten everything, the pictures on the walls, slightly, I want everything sort of balanced and symmetrical, to, being obsessive about, washing your hands. Are there germs? There might be some more germs. There might be, there's a wide range of what I consider OCD. And I would say I'm a little bit OCD. I like things very tidy. I can't think straight unless I have, like, my desk is organized, I like to have it that way. So it's, yeah, very much so. So when we get those balanced, it really kind of calms people down from that.
Back to microbiome, Alison is asking again, even after antibiotic use, she was asking how to put your microbiome back in balance, and she was asking if antibiotic is harming that equilibrium.
Well, that's a really good question, because there are a couple of antibiotic, there's a category, the fluoroquinolones, that Cipro and Levaquin are members of, that actually they say do permanent damage to the mitochondria, where we make energy in the electron transport chain. But I don't think so. I disagree. I'm one of those people who thinks no limitations if you refuse to believe in them, because I've seen people heal from this. With Cipro and Levaquin, people will be walking along and their tendons will rupture, like their Achilles tendon will just snap. And it's because the mitochondria, especially in the connective tissue, is damaged. And some of these people are bedridden and just cannot function at all after, a round of Cipro or Levaquin. So, but I think there's a lot you can do to repair that. And that's what I have seen clinically. So I don't have a study to prove that, but yeah, I have seen it happen.
Again, from Beast Phone, she's clarifying. She says she didn't mean Crohn, but she meant microvirome. And then she's clarifying the acronym, the ECS, for endocannabinoids system. Well, there's a typo there, but yeah.
Okay. Yes, very much so. We have cannabinoid receptors in our brain naturally, which makes you wonder, why are those there? But actually, we make our own endocannabinoids. We naturally, and we do it through meditation or blissful states, or upregulating the VDR. It turns out dopamine can actually fill those endocannabinoid receptors. So a lot of controversy here. I'm not a big fan of CBS or CBD. CBD, I'm not a big fan, because I think it's a Band-Aid. If you get your brain balanced, it'll be like, doesn't even sound interesting to me. But I don't want to say that it hasn't helped many, many, many people who are struggling with all kinds of conditions. If they don't know how to work with their genes and they don't have this solution, it can be a nice Band-Aid and helpful. But if we fill up those endocannabinoid receptors with dopamine, it takes away our desire and need for that. And then microbiome, yeah, there are certain genes that affect your microbiome more than others, and one is the FUT gene. It's FUT, and it's how we make fucosyl transferase, which is what it does is basically feed good bacteria, feeds our bifidobacteria. So if you don't make that, if you can't attach fucose to a glycoprotein molecule and feed your good bacteria, it can cause low levels of bifidobacterium. So when I see somebody with the FUT genes, which is in our report, I'll often suggest that they either get a source of fucose or supplement with bifidobacterium specifically.
From Cora, would you be open to sharing the paper you wrote about the correlation on what you do with Ayurvedic medicine, basically? And there are brands of vitamins that you find are the most effective when people are implementing the supplementation of their salts.
Yes, I'd be glad to share the Ayurvedic paper. I'll dig that up and send it to you, you all, and you can forward it to them. So second half of the question?
Second half of the question is, are there brands of vitamins that you find are the most effective?
Yeah, very much so. I always use Dr. Lines because I have access to them. So I always suggest that you use Dr. Lines because they're highly regulated. They are checked, every batch is checked for heavy metals and chemicals and pesticides. they have in them exactly what they say they have in them. So it's a whole different beast than going to CVS or the pharmacy and picking up what's on the shelf, because there's nobody really regulating those. They can say, oh, I've got 500 milligrams of vitamin C, but it's really nobody watching and testing it, making sure that there aren't a bunch of nasty things in there and that they actually have 500 milligrams of vitamin C or 500 IU. So I always use doctor lines if you can get a hold of them. And if you have a natural healthcare practitioner, I would suggest. So on the suggestions that I've given to you, they're generic. So the ones for the COVID risk are genetic, or generic. So I'll say, vitamin D3, 5,000 IU. But if you can get those from a highly respected doctor's brand, that would be best.
From Veronica, what would be the role of essential oils?
Well, that's a good question. I do have practitioners that use essential oils to kind of balance out these pathways as well. And I can't say, I dink around with the essential oils, but I can't say I'm an expert on them, let's put it that way. And I can't say that I have seen robust balancing with them. Do I think they're effective? Yes. Do I think they can help? Yes. Here's the thing, when you're working with your genes, your genes aren't going to change. So you really kind of have to stay on your supplement program. So in the same sense, you'd have to stay on those essential oils. At least I think so. I could be wrong on that, but I don't see permanent changes happening. I know when I stop my supplements, my depression comes right back. So it's like, that's my set point. So I'm willing, and my program isn't that big. It's, maybe 10 things. I take them in the morning and bam, my attitude is good. I'm much happier. I like living in Happyville much better than Sadville. It's a much better place. So I'm totally motivated to take the supplements that are designed for my genetics.
Okay, we have an acknowledgement from B's phone. She says she agrees and stimulating it naturally is the best way to go about it. And that's why she wanted to verify about stimulating as well. And she's thank you for answering the question. And Alison, if we would like to get genetically tested, how would we go about it?
That's a really important question. So if you, to get the DNA test, you have to go to, at this point, again, 23andMe or Ancestry, go online and order their test kits, and it comes to your house and you spit in the tube and send it back. So you don't have to go to a lab, you don't have to go to a doctor to get that. And then once you get your raw data, you download the raw data onto your website or onto your desktop, and then you plug it into our website at MyHappyGenes.com. Let me share the contact information here. Let's go down at the bottom here. Okay, so our website is MyHappyGenes.com, and you'll see a link there that says Analyze My Genes up on the top. Anna is my assistant. If you have questions or if you need anything, she's awesome. She's just a sweetheart. She'd be glad to chat with you. And then if you want to email us, you can reach us at info@myhappygenes.com. And then these are the things that I'll be giving you guys. The special report, the COVID-19 risk, the answers in your genes, PowerPoint notes from this webinar. And then I'm going to dig up that Ayurvedic paper and include that as well.
That's wonderful. And we're also perfectly on time.
Perfect. And so if you go to myhappygenes.com/offer, that's where you will get these documents and be able to download those.
Yep. I'd really like to thank you and everyone else who attended this very, very, very insightful session webinar. I'd like to close on a good note in reconnection with our heart, with Mother Earth. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and we're going to take 4 square breaths from our mouth into our heart and out. So we will be inhaling for 4 and exhaling for 4. Let's get started. Let's get inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Let's inhale abundance into our hearts. And let's let go of scarcity. Let's inhale union into our heart. And let's go of useless fragmentation. Namaste. Thank you, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed just as much as I did. Thank you.